All right, hey guys. Day 11. You're going to be in Matthew 5, verses 21 through 32. You guys go ahead and read that, and then come back for some commentary after a pause. All right, so like we said last time, Jesus is explaining the heart of the law, and what he's doing is kind of resetting the way that people think about the law. For a long while, the Pharisees, the religious leaders, they had basically taken God's law and they had added on a lot of man-made traditions. So there was this idea that God's law was kind of this thing that you didn't want to even risk breaking. And so therefore, if you didn't want to risk getting to God's law, if you followed even more stringent laws that were kind of surrounding the issues of God's law, then you would never risk actually breaking one of God's law, because you were following these more strict laws, and they actually called it a hedge of protection around God's law, or you might think of it as like a fence of protection around God's law. But the problem was the people became so focused on following these hedge of protection kind of laws, these additional added man-made tradition laws, that they really no longer followed the heart of God's law. Kind of to put it in a silly example, let's imagine that God's word said that you are not to chew and eat a cookie on Sunday. However, it comes Sunday and you really, really want some good cookies that you bought at the store or that your parents made. And so you know that the law says you can't chew and eat the cookie on Sunday, but maybe you start thinking to yourself, well, if I just put the cookie in my mouth and let it dissolve, I don't have to chew it, but I can still taste it, I can still enjoy it, I can still swallow it. And so that's what you decide to do. Are you really keeping the law if you're still consuming the cookie? No, you're not, but you're technically keeping the tradition around the law. You're not chewing the cookie, you're not eating the cookie, you're just letting it dissolve. And so that's kind of what they had done to a lot of God's laws, and Jesus is getting back at the heart of them. And so he starts with this one on murder. He said, obviously, you've heard it said that you shall not murder. However, he then says that anyone who is angry with, to the point of cursing at or cursing against, has already murdered their brother in their heart. It's almost like if you've thought it to yourself, if you've willed their ill will, it's just as bad to God as if you had murdered them, in a sense. It separates you from God just as much. And so Jesus says this is the solution. He says, don't hold grudges. Don't let the sun go down if you're still angry with a friend, a family member, someone at church. Go and reconcile immediately. Don't let Satan have that foothold in your heart with even a bit of angerness and bitterness and resentment. And then he moves on to adultery. And this one's hard too. Jesus says that you've heard it said, obviously, don't commit adultery. Don't have sex with other people outside of marriage. Don't cheat on your spouse in marriage. Don't commit adultery. But then he takes it a step further and he says, I tell you the truth. Anyone who even looks lustfully at another woman or another person has already committed adultery with that person in their heart. We live in a culture, we live in a place where we are constantly tempted by looking lustfully at other people. There are billboards on the side of the roads. You go on the beach and there is a lot more skin than there is bathing suits a lot of times. And so you have to be really, really careful to not take that second look when you're tempted. You have to be good about bouncing your eyes away from temptations. And we have devices in our pockets that within seconds you can queue up anything you ever want to see, and a lot of it's not good. And so Jesus is saying that when we even look lustfully at another person, we have already committed adultery with them in our heart, and we've already broken that boundary that God has told us not to break. And then he says something that's kind of interesting. He said, if your eye is causing you to sin, gouge it out. If your hand's causing you to sin, cut it off. And now, Jesus is not literally talking about maiming our bodies, but what he is getting at here is that if there are things in our lives that are making us more prone to giving into these temptations, maybe time to remove them. To kind of put it in a modern context, if you're finding that having your device unrestricted access to it is causing you to go to websites and be at places that you know you shouldn't be. Might be time to not have that device in your bedroom at night. It may be time to put parental blockers on it. It may be time to download some accountability software so that someone can help you make sure that you're not going to places you shouldn't be. And so, in a sense, you would be cutting off that unrestricted access to make sure that you're not sinning.